The quick answer is that becomes the measure of a good leader. Great leaders aren't afraid to make that decision. They're going to take in the information, but they're going to know the moment and they're going to be able to have almost impeccable timing for saying yes or no. Yes, we're going to do this. No, we can't do that. Or they might, in some cases, send it back for a re-review with certain guidance and instruction.
Let me invite you to sit back, drop your jaw, tongue, and shoulders. Take a deep breath, and if you wish, close your eyes for a moment and feel the beat within. In a few seconds, you just jumped from your head to your heart and felt the beat within, opening up to receive even more value and fulfillment out of your business and life. And today's episode. I'm your host, Nico van der Venne, confidant to successful CEOs, founders, and entrepreneurs striving to achieve everlasting fulfillment. Now, before we dive into today's episode, I have a small request. If you find value in our podcast, please take a moment to subscribe, rate it, give us a 5-star review, and your feedback helps us to create an even more interesting episode. So it also reaches out to more listeners, and we can continue bringing these amazing contents to you. So share this episode with at least one person that you know that you might think that they might be interested, so that we can create a nice community. So thank you for your support in any case. Let's get started. Now, first, let me introduce to you our next speaker, Doug Thorpe. Doug is a business advisor and executive coach for companies, owners, and busy executives. For 20 years plus, he has helped entrepreneurs and executives find better ways to grow their business, achieving better results, and win in life. Welcome to the Everlasting Fulfillment Podcast, Doug. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Nico. It's a pleasure to be here. I know it's taken us a bit to get this organized and set up, but I'm sure it'll be a good one. Looking forward to our discussion.
Absolutely. Yeah, the holidays and all that beautiful stuff, comes by, and then schedules start getting a little bit blown up as well. Yeah, no, that's perfectly fine. So, Doug, first off, you mentioned you're a licensed pilot. How does that link with your executive coaching and supporting entrepreneurs? Tell us about that.
Well, interesting intro section. I can't say I've ever been asked that question right off the top. The experience of getting a pilot's license does involve some intense training and development before you ever really get to sit behind the seat, sit in the seat behind the stick on the aircraft. And I think it's a safe thing to correlate with leadership development. You ought to prepare yourself for that with some form of training, whether it's through mentoring or more formalized schooling, before you try to take on that first role and responsibility as a manager or a leader in a business. And sadly, for many of us, it doesn't get to happen that way. You come out of school, you go to work, you're an individual contributor, but you get recognized for great contribution, and management above you says, we're going to make you a team leader. Poof, you're the manager now. And then the story begins.
Yeah, that's recognizable.
Happens every day.
Yeah,
Happens every day.
It's like what I've recently been bringing out there is that a lot of subject matter experts, they get promoted from the team into a management role, and one thing, they leave a hole behind in the team because the expertise leaves, and they get on a new role, and they have to add that management role onto their subject matter expert role. So what's your experience with that? And how do you advise people on that level?
Well, you're 100% right. That's exactly the way it happens. And again, I go back to my analogy that sole contributor is identified as the best producer on the team, whether that's best accountant, best engineer, best worker, best technical expert, data analyst, on and on and on. And they're working in a team of like kind skill sets, but they're designated as the better performer out of the group. So there's this logic that says, well, we'll make them the team leader. And usually those first appointments do involve continuing your own commitment to individual contribution as well as leading the team around you. So one of the first immediate challenges is often the idea that you just got elevated among your peer group, all the people that you used to go out to happy hour with or have lunch with. Now they are, and I'm using air quotes here, your employees. And that creates the often first stumbling block for that newly appointed manager is how do you shift gears? How do you become that point of designated authority over someone that has been a longtime friend, not just colleague, but friend at work? And, you have to start making that separation and moving forward. But if I can fast forward on this track, what happens is, so the person that's thrust into that role has continuing success. Let's just say that. And they get recognized again. Maybe it's a year, maybe it's 2 years later, but again, they're tapped to say, well, you did real good as that team leader. Now we're going to make you head of the department. And now you've got 3 or 4 teams of like kind that you're responsible for. And you get on this sort of gerbil wheel of expectation in your own mind. You're saying, well, I did okay with the people part of things. I got promoted, but I also know I was recognized for my contribution of the work we did. So now I'm going to double down on the work effort. And after about that second or third promotion, you start hearing people talk about burnout. It's like, I can't still produce 100 widgets a day and do all the people management responsibilities I've got. And there's this tug and pull of conflict that starts to emerge.
Yeah, true. Yeah, and I think from my personal experience, I've had the opportunity to switch companies where I came into a leadership role at the point where you're not the individual contributor being promoted, but you're actually taking on the role and function as a leader or a manager. Do you see a big difference between those two situations? What would you do if somebody would come into a company and they take over a role from somebody that's previous there, and they are, the manager who comes in? What do you see as the big differences there?
Well, oddly enough, I would almost argue that that scenario is easier to pull off than being that guy that is perpetually promoted up in the original organization. It's almost easier to come in and be hired as a manager because the the people on the team, the employees around you, they don't know you as a colleague. They don't know you as a peer equal. Maybe age-wise, they determine that, you're the same age, or maybe even in a lot of cases nowadays, you're younger than the people that are going to work for you. But nonetheless, you get a little bit of a grace period there, kind of a free pass while people wait and see how you're going to operate, what kind of person are you going to be, and how are you going to show up. And that's where I really stress to individual leaders at all levels that it is so critically important that you lock in on a vision of the leader you think you want to be. And the question is literally, how are you going to show up every day? Whether that's attitude, whether that's demeanor, whether that's tone, posture, practice, all the things it's particularly important in your scenario where I'm moving companies and, I'm going to show up on day one at the new company. Well, you got to start on day one being that guy, that persona of the leader that you really want to be. You can't wait for that to come together. You can't try a few things, test this, test that, tinker with it, because that just creates chaos and confusion for the people around you.
Yeah.
And, I tell the story back in the day when I was a young lieutenant in the Army. I got assigned to report to this colonel who was a, 3-time Vietnam tour vet and a really gruff, grizzly guy and notorious for being just a mean-spirited, almost wicked kind of leader. But, I approached it with the idea, I'm going to give him some grace. I've heard the stories, but I'm going to wait on my own experiences to make the call. But conversely, whatever he turns out to be, I'm not going to let it bother me. And he and I ended up, and he was gruff. He was real short tempered. But I got to where we had a great relationship because I just effectively kind of saw through all that bluster and noise and just stayed focused on the work we needed to do. And, if I had a data fact in my hand that I knew was contrary to what he was saying or where he was going, I just respectfully but firmly stood my ground, and he respected that. So he demanded a lot, but he gave a lot. And people, after about a year I'd worked for this guy, people said, "How do you get along with him? You guys seem to have this amazing chemistry." But he's not any different than he's always been. And I said, "No, well, again, number one, I don't let it bother me. I don't, that's the style he's chosen and I'm going to accept it. I'm not going to let it be an issue."
Yeah, it does give a certain different dynamic to the situation. But to come to that point, you must have gone through some experiences that got you to the point where you're saying, I'll just let this water like a shower flow over me and it doesn't bother me. In some essence, you're probably going to sometimes, swear behind a corner and say, "Warren, he really he's got his head on today. I don't want to, But then you come back and, streak faced and continue. Is that the case? Did you have experiences?
Well, yeah. In fairness, yes, that was the case. My own prior training had, was the equivalent of, there were chapters, I should say, in my training of the equivalent of, being a prisoner of war and how to endure that and how to survive under those very austere conditions. And I won't elaborate on all the rest of it, but yeah, I had had some experiential training and I realized that it, everything in life falls out on a spectrum one way or another. When you really think about it, there's a high and a low or a good and a bad. And, if you can learn how to look at the world that way, I'll give you a very specific example of that. My college roommate was a career military guy. He retired as a brigadier general. He had a very significant leadership role in the U.S. Gulf War. He was deputy commander of 3rd Infantry that took over Baghdad and captured Saddam Hussein. So when all that was over, I was at his house one night and we were having dinner. And I said to him, "Bill, you strike me. You are the most calm. Your aura of calm is just almost overwhelming. It's like for all that you've been through, and I can only imagine." And he had not divulged a lot of detail to me, but it was war, and I could only imagine. I said, "How do you have that calm and demeanor?" And he grinned a little bit and he said, "Doug, I learned 2 things along the way. There's 2 fundamental questions. Is my family safe? Question number 1. And question number 2 is anybody around me dying?" If the answers to those questions are yes and no, I'm good. Yes. is way out on the spectrum somewhere, and I don't need to get worked up. I don't need to get upset. I don't need to be, over the top with my solution. He said, obviously, if the answer to those questions are different, then yeah, I'm going to be in a different gear. I'm going to be operating in a whole different way. But for the majority of life that I'm living now, you know, those questions, the answers are yes and no. Yes, my family's safe. No, nobody around me's dying, so I'm good.
Yeah, it's a little bit extreme for the day-to-day life, I would say, but it kind of my idea brings it back to the circle of influence and the circle of concern, where at some point you have the possibility to know or to act on, for instance, your breathing. That's something that you can control. That's something that you can do something about. Your heart rate is a bit different. That doesn't your subconscious that manages that. But if it's storming outside, there's nothing you can do about it. So that's the circle of concern, and then you just can't do anything about it. And if you listen to those two questions, bit extreme, like I said, but they kind of relate to what do you really have influence on, or what do you act upon? And comes down to values as well. What's the biggest priority in your life? If somebody's dying, of course, close by. If it's a family member, it's even 10 points up. But it's your experience, because it's 20 years plus, in your experience as coach, as executive support, what is the thing that makes, let's say, a person, individual contributor, that gets his promotions up to a certain point, and what's the tipping point of becoming a real executive? I would say borderline C-level. What's the point that you've experienced?
Well, I actually do a lot of work in that space. A lot of my executive coaching clients are right on the edge of that shift in their careers. Maybe classically, in today's modern business lingo, it typically shows up at the so-called director level or senior director, um, and then ultimately, vice president and more formal officer titles. But and then in that director, senior director kind of role, what you hear a lot of is that the discussions are less about tactical execution. What's our volume today? How many widgets did we deliver today? It's less about that and more about the bigger picture, or as everybody calls it, strategic thinking. What's our strategy for the bigger picture? Where are we going to need to go tomorrow or next year? And again, in the evolution of an individual career path, it's that inflection point where you start hearing the people above you talk about strategy rather than execution. Mm-hmm. And not that they've given up on execution, by no means, but they've delegated that. They know that people in lower ranks in the organization are going to deliver, and they're accountable for that delivery. But in the leadership rooms or meetings, the talk is much more about bigger picture strategy. Oh, did you see what our competitor announced today? Or did you hear what the market did to us? Or, did you hear about this new discovery of technology that we're going to have to now explore? All of those elements have a far longer term impact and become more strategic in the direction the business is going to go. And therefore, the individual leader needs to expand that lens, and they need to start developing that bigger picture thinking. It's not so much nose down, but it's head up. And that's the shift that, again, most people on the traditional career path has struggled to make.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, absolutely. It's in my experience that I've had very big teams. So right now, at this point, I'm about 18 people around that have indirect report to me. So there's two persons who directly report to me, and then they have their team. And in the past, when I've noticed this, when I had It was with IBM, and I was a senior project manager. So I had a team that worked for customers where we did continuous projects one after the other for one or two customers. And we had a team of about 300 people in India, and I had one contact person there, managed the whole team. So I came to a point where I was no longer indeed managing schedules and budgets and all that stuff, but we were looking at, okay, what's going to be the next step and the next project that's going to come on. And one thing that I did learn in project management is you are no longer actually executing. You're like you said, the strategy is so much more important to know what's the next 5 steps than and something that I've been a gamer for years, and that's one of the things that I love about a lot of these games, where you start to use strategies to go to the next level. And it's not, just shoot the bad guys and then you go to the next level. It's more of, okay, if we move to that room, what's the effect going to be when the enemy comes in and all of that. So I think that's probably something that you kind of learn. There's not a lot of, I'm going to skip to another thing. There's not a lot of countries anymore that have mandatory military training. They have schools, and then they go to, either university or something like that. But strategic thinking in that element is completely different when you look at it from a military point of view. When you're talking about human lives, the load of that strategic thinking is completely different as well than a financial based thinking. And I don't know if what your experience is in that area, the difference between working in a military environment against an executive or a corporate environment.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of corollaries and a lot of metaphors that do fit. I mean, I had a discussion with someone a while back, and we were talking about the pros and cons of trying to apply military metaphor in modern business. And the conclusion, I think, that we came away with at the end of our discussion was it's tricky and it's risky to go too far down that path. While some of them are perfectly right, just the basic idea of you open up the building for the new day and you say, we're going to war. Well, no, you're not.
Typical subject. Yeah.
You're going to have some challenges. You're going to have some tasks. You're going to have some obligations and responsibilities that have to get resolved. But, again, when you extend the metaphor all the way to its end, whether you win or lose, there's going to be casualties along the way. And are you really going to war today? I don't think so. So, but that said, there definitely still some thinking, and to your original point, the idea of being able to think about strategy and moving large elements of your business down the future path is what strategic design, strategic planning, and thinking is all about. It's like if you anticipate something happening. I'll give you another quick example. After my military days, I went to work in banking, and I'm aging myself now, but when I first started in banking, we didn't have ATMs. You couldn't get cash out of a machine. You had to go to the bank and talk to a teller. But while I was there, all of that technology came online, and everything, all the inventions had been deployed, or at least the first versions of the machines and the technology. And our immediate closest competitor bank had gone headlong into ATM delivery because their strategy, they were predominantly a retail bank, which means in banking terms, retail is consumer banking. Checkbooks, savings accounts, car loans, home loans, boat loans, all those things for the individuals. We, on the other hand, were more of a commercial bank. We banked businesses. Now, we had banking products for the owners and employees of those businesses, but that wasn't our primary target market. We were after the businesses themselves. And so we had an internal team of planners and analysis put this study together about the use of ATMs, and they made this big pitch to our chairman. And I was sitting in the room. I still remember it vividly. It was about an hour-long presentation, and the recommendation was, we need this to compete. If nothing else, it's a defensive strategy. If we don't have it, they're all going to go somewhere else, blah, blah, blah. And our chairman shook his head and said, nope, I get it. I know we need it. One day we will have it, but not today. He said, I'm going to let the other guys suffer the pains, the growth pains of perfecting this technology. And then at another day, we will revisit this. Well, the other day was 2 years later. A full 2 years went by. And sure enough, we were hearing horror stories of the pains and trouble they were going through to try to make this happen, because all the machines were available. The backbone network for connecting the machines did not exist. All machines were hardwired into bank locations. That wiring had to go to the computer at the bank. The computer may or may not talk to other computers elsewhere in the banking system. None of the backside infrastructure had been developed. And that became the glaring hole in the process of delivering that service. So 2 years went by, we revisited this subject, and we saw wildly obvious was the opportunity to not so much worry about placing the machines, but we wanted to build the superhighway to connect everything. And we did. We formed a subsidiary company. We got a consortium of other banks to invest in it. And we ran the backbone that connected about a dozen different bank brands.
Okay.
And we made millions of dollars doing that.
I can imagine. That must have been a golden ticket.
And for those that are old enough, you might remember in the early days of ATMs, they had stamps on the outside of the machine. They would tell you which network they were part of. It was Pulse and Switch, and there were two others, and I'm drawing a blank. But that told you whether or not your card from your bank was going to be able to talk to that machine and get you money.
Yeah.
Because if your bank wasn't part of one of those switches, you couldn't. That machine was deaf and dumb talking to your card. So it was very vital to have that back end infrastructure, and our bank drove that innovation.
Okay.
And like I said, it was a 2-year delay. We didn't skip a beat as far as our primary market. In fact, we were in a growth mode, and we continued to grow over those 2 years. And then all of a sudden, it was prime for us to plug in and install ATMs in our locations, because not only could we support it with stellar quality delivery, but now it was a low cost option to us to put it in and make it available to all our customers.
Yeah. Well, you talked about the presentation and the executive that was there. I work with a lot of people that are at a high level in their company. They might be the owner or a CEO. And when you talked about the decision that they made, usually these things are, weighed off, and a lot of arguments go on and this and that. But at the end of the day, it's like supreme commander of an army. They need to take the decisions. What's your personal experience with people that are in those positions and they need to take decisions on their own? And usually they come from between the second layer, let's say, where they used to have colleagues that supported them, but now at this point they become a C-level, a CEO or founder, and they need to take these decisions. What the effect is on that person? What's your experience in that?
Well, the quick answer is that becomes the measure of a good leader. Great leaders aren't afraid to make that decision. They're going to take in the information, but they're going to know the moment, and they're going to be able to have almost impeccable timing for saying yes or no. Yes, we're going to do this. No, we can't do that. or they might, in some cases, send it back for a re-review with certain guidance and instruction. And great leaders do that very skillfully, very artfully, and very wise. It'll pan out. In back to my example, our chairman was a legend in the banking world at the time, and he just had this golden touch for making those kind of decisions. And oftentimes, it was contrary to what the group think told him. The group had gotten together and said, we need these machines. We need to go forward quickly. We're falling behind. We're already behind. We need to we need to catch up. We need to keep going. And he went, nope, 2 years. And, it is this is a good example of what I call the difference between the art and science of being a leader. Science tells you, give me the data, let me do the spreadsheet, let me read the analysis. All right, data tells me, we need to make a left turn here at Albuquerque. That's what we need to do. The art is when you can read the room you can read the market, and you have that, almost, some people call it the gut feel. No, this is right or that's wrong. And you can apply that, and you're not afraid to apply that. You're not going to get hung up on the hunger for data. You're going to apply that less tangible sense and sensibility about it. Now, a lot of that obviously does come from years of experience in making potentially wrong calls early on, but it's the constant and perpetual learning about your effectiveness as a leader that develops those skill sets and gives you that confidence in that gut feel that says, no, this is the right thing to do. Here's where we're going to go.
Yeah. I think that's one of the most difficult things to define in leadership. It's like you said, when it's not about the numbers anymore at some point. It's not about all the basic standard information that you can get. Even though there's a lot of companies that, green light everything or yellow light everything in Excel sheets while, the floor is burning and the people are running around without a head, like chickens without a head, which information does not come to higher leadership at a good time. But if you're a good leader, you understand that there's a lot more going on than people are showing you, because they, put a veil in front of whatever they're presenting to you. Now, if I understand this person that you were talking about, he did not resist change, or he did not have a resistance to scaling or anything like that. It just that good common sense of saying, not right now. We don't want to be the first one to shoot the gun. We're going to use, the revised version that has, leveled up by the experience of the others, or has been shot a couple of times
Right.
before.
And the ability to have that kind of artful sense about your decision making, I think, is directly correlated with your ability as a leader to have shaped the vision and values of the business. And I'll give you a quick example that comes to mind. The restaurant chain Chick-fil-A is famous for closing on Sunday. Well, that's a value that the founder baked in from day one to the business. He was a man of faith. His Bible told him you don't work on Sundays. So our business is not going to work on Sunday. And if you're an employee, you might be willing to work on Sunday because your personal values are a little different. But he said, nope, as a company, we're not going to do that. And of course, Wall Street beat him up, immediately when that announcement was made. And they said, are you nuts? You're closing intentionally for 52 days a year? What about all the volume you're going to lose over that? Well, he unwavered and said, nope, that's who we are, and that's what we're going to do. It'll be what it will be, and we're going to be okay with that. And kind of, as they say, the rest is history. It's one of the most successful franchise chains of its kind because there are many other things that happen that make up. And, they still, I haven't looked at the numbers lately, but Chick-fil-A, on one of the metrics of food chains, the dollar volume per square foot that they produce is at the top of the chart everywhere. And that's measured against the companies that are open on Sunday.
Yeah. Goes to show what a little decision can make as a difference. If customers know that this is the situation and that's the value of a chain or anything like that, they might even have more respect for it than they would say, you just open up on Sunday.
Yeah.
I think there's isn't there a soda can that has remained 99 cents for forever as well, by likewise a decision that the owner said from the beginning, we're keeping it at 99 cents because everybody should be able to buy this drink. It's something like that as well, which made it also popular. I read it recently. I'm in Europe, so it's kind of, for us, it's kind of different as a perspective, but we also have these.
I'm not familiar specifically with that example, but yeah, that would be the concept, that statement of value and who the leaders want the company to be. And I've got another quick example I can share. This is on a lower scale. I know an entrepreneurial owner of a construction company in Florida, and they're a good sized company, but they build these kind of tilt wall service center type buildings, warehouse, docks, delivery things. And, they do $40 or $50 million a year, pretty good sized company of its kind. And I was talking to him and I said, let's talk about vision and values. What's the hallmark value of your company? And he said, oh, it's real simple. He said, we do the right thing. And at first I kind of went, yeah, come on, what is that? What does that really mean? And he said, no, fair question. He said, I'll give you an example. He said, in construction, it's common knowledge. The whole industry believes this. If we've got a project and we make a mistake, we're going to correct it, but whatever it cost us to do the correction, it gets baked into another part of the project so that we still make our money and it gets billed to the customer one way or another in another area. He said, in my world, doing the right thing says we don't do that. If we make a mistake, we eat it. Mm-hmm. If we have to, redig a trench and pour new concrete, whatever it costs to do that, that's on us. We made the mistake. We're going to fix it and it'll be right, but we're not going to charge you for it. And I'll show you the numbers. You'll be able to see the numbers. And he said, over time, what that has afforded us, he said, we're not the cheapest bidders on a job, but our customers who have been with us a while know what we're doing and they believe what we're doing and they appreciate the transparency and the honesty about it. And they know when they get their final bill from us, there's no fluff, there's no fudge, there's no messing with the numbers to get to that final number. And people respect that. Yeah. Because with everybody else that does it the other way, there's always an argument at the end about the final bill. What do you mean the project ran over by, $10,000? So, show me why, why did that happen? And there's this song and dance and a lot of noise and hurt feelings and everything. He said, that never happens on any of my projects.
It's a great thing because these days I've noticed that I've recently done some construction work here as well, which is way smaller than what you're mentioning. But the people that I interviewed to do the work, together with my partner, we have a way of handling contractors, and we asked the specific questions, a bit like you just mentioned that the guy says, when something goes wrong, what do you do with it? And we asked that question to several of them, and one of them radically said, I never make a problem. I never have an issue.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. Thank you very much for coming, but
disqualified.
have a good ride home. And then this other guy who came in, he was together with his girlfriend, wife, I don't know. But they worked together. And she was like, oh, problems. Well, first thing we'll do is call you, because we just need to let you know that something went wrong, because this is your place and we need it. And she went on like that. I was like, okay, our decision's been made. Make us an offer. We're probably going to work with you. And he was like, okay. Because for me, owning something, and from day one already saying that we're owning this, and you can see the difference between, doing this as a sales talk against really, really telling them that you've approved. There is a clear difference in the way of acting. But indeed, it's beautiful to hear that there are still some people out there who have these rigid values that actually have impact, and that they get their own fan club at the end of when they come out of that. So, Doug, we've talked about a lot of different things about leadership, and we actually kind of went up for the scale as well, which I like very much. I think there might be a lot of people listening that might be interested in contacting you or looking at your materials. I know that you have a very extensive library of stuff that's out there. I've been following you for quite a while, and there's a lot of interesting things that you bring out, letters and your videos and so on. So how can people, reach out to you? What do they do? Tell us.
Yeah. Well, I do operate two websites. One is my company name, and that is Headway Exec. That's headwayexec.com is the website. That's the one that's oriented more to the entrepreneurial sector, both in terms of business acquisition or business transition. If you're an investor and you've acquired a business and working on transitioning it into your new ownership, we've got a lot of resources, both people and materials, to help with that transfer. But then also what I call my more personal website is dougthorpe.com, THORPE.com. That gets into a lot more of the individual one-on-one or small group coaching that I do. Like I do a lot of leadership team type workshops, offsites, things of that sort. It's got links to the books I've written and also links to the podcast show that you alluded to. My podcast is called Leadership Powered by Common Sense. It's available on all the streaming services, and I'm all over social media, easy to find, and would welcome if anybody wants to reach out, just have a chat. If you want to share a challenge you're up against now, we can talk. I might be able to solve it on the one call. Who knows? If that is, that's great. Happy to do that. But if you'd like to, maybe engage in another direction, do a little bit more, happy to have that talk as well.
Great stuff. I will add the links as well in the show notes, so people feel free to connect from there. Doug, I want to really thank you for your time. I know you have a lot on your plate, and there's a lot of stuff moving around on your side of the pond. And I hope to talk to you soon as well. From the other side of the mic, in that case, we'll meet again. Thank you very much for your time.
All right, Nico. Thank you. Pleasure to be here, and hope it helped.
Absolutely. I think there's a lot of inspirational stuff in our conversation. And to our listeners, thank you very much again for listening to this new episode of the Everlasting Podcast. Have a good one, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Everlasting Podcast. Let me leave you with a few questions to answer in the comments. How do you see the different topics we discussed during this interview? What are your thoughts? What stood out for you? Let us know in the comments or just send us your feedback. We launch new episodes weekly. Don't miss any by ensuring you are subscribed to the show. Click the follow button now. We depend on the organic growth of the podcast to inspire more and more people. So by giving us a 5-star review and sharing this episode with at least one of your friends who might be interested in the subject, you will significantly help more people become inspired. But more than anything, I am grateful to you for taking the time to listen to the show. If you are also a successful CEO, founder, or entrepreneur who has inspiring words to say, feel free to contact us for an interview at contact@nicovandevenne.com. Thank you for listening. We will see you again soon with more inspirational conversations on achieving everlasting fulfillment.